Hi, Lilith. Thank you so
Hello.
much for joining us, Think Positive, today to talk about zines and mental health. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit about what the Edinburgh Zine Library is up to at the moment.
Cool. So yeah, my name is Lilith, and I'm a zine maker. I'm an artist, and I'm based in Kirkcaldy in Fife. But as well as my own personal practice, I co-founded and helped run the Edinburgh Zine Library, which is a collectively run reference library of contemporary zines, housed at the Central Library, which is on George IV Bridge in Edinburgh. As the zine library, we facilitate a lot of workshops to get people making their own zine. And then I separately run lots of art groups for children and young people in Kirkcaldy to get them experimenting, creating and playing. The first question people normally ask me after that kind of spiel is like, what's a zine? So I thought I'd just cover that briefly, because otherwise I'm going to say zine, zine, zine a lot, and everyone's going to be like, what are they talking about? So what's a zine? There's a straightforward-ish answer and a more complicated one. A zine is basically a kind of homespun, self-published booklet or pamphlet with a small distribution. I've got some examples here. You might have come across zines before in all sorts of different contexts, like at gigs or a comics fair, an independent bookstore. I know that like Lighthouse in Edinburgh and categories in Glasgow stock them. Kind of beneath that simple answer is the more complicated one. And you only really start to dig down to it when is this a zine becomes an important question. And for me, that was when I started cataloguing zines for the zine library. Then kind of a bunch of the values that underpin zines become important, more so than the way it looks. Zines are DIY. They don't involve exporting kind of graphic design to a graphic designer or font to a typesetter. They use cut and paste a lot, which puts them in a bit of tension with copyright. They aren't made for profit, and they operate on kind of a different economy. Zines are often not exchanged for money, although you can buy them, but they are swapped, traded, gifted. All of the zines in the Zine Library collection have been donated by zinesters. We don't have funding, so we don't actively pay for zines. So we kind of rely on that aspect of the zine community. And zines fundamentally contain different voices and stories than you see in kind of mainstream media, in kind of the dominant narrative. They're specific, when I think a lot of media demands kind of generalizations. So really zines are a space for complexity.
Right.
Zines are also like physical objects, and already I'm kind of having to change how I do this sort of chat because of kind of the situation. So much has been written about zines as like material and physical objects, and normally at this point in any conversation about zines I'd start handing them out, because I think, well, I often used to say that the best way to understand a zine is to hold one and to read one. And there are lots of links to some great digital zines, but I think it is an important question, and one I think that opens more generally into a discussion about the impact of kind of COVID-19 is if the most important aspects of zines, or one of the most important aspects of zines, is that they're physical objects, not just can we, but should we be imagining them differently?
Right.
So that's kind of zines. And then I guess the kind of other part of that is like, what do zines have to do with kind of student mental health? And why am I interested in that? So I did my undergraduate study with the Open University after dropping out of a brick university when I was 18, during about, I guess, 5 years of fairly catastrophically bad mental health. My interest in my undergraduate study was in narratives, and particularly those around illness and those around mental health. Like, how do we tell stories about mental health, and why is that important? After graduating from the OU, I trained as a peer support worker, which is someone who goes back into a mental health setting, having had experiences of mental health challenges themselves. I did that with the Recovery College East in Cambridge, kind of the Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust. And once again, in that context, I found that telling your story was considered this foundational part of recovery, at least how it's kind of conceived by the NHS. When I moved up to Edinburgh about 3 years ago, maybe more actually, oh goodness, I don't know how long I've lived there. I discovered zines and found suddenly a medium where I could kind of creatively, freely, almost inconsequentially experiment with telling my story.
Yeah.
And I could also read countless other people's stories. Zines were the way I built a community of diverse voices around me. They helped me make sense of my experiences and gave me space to explore different ways of telling and being. And that led to my interest in zines and mental health, and particularly student mental health, as that was kind of the period where I had struggled the most and where access to this community would have been so important for me. I'm really lucky to be working, like my actual kind of paid job is in an education setting right now. I work as the campus cycling officer at Fife College. And outside of my work in that role promoting cycling, it's been really interesting and inspiring to see the work the SCSA does to engage and empower students and build community, crucially. Student mental health is it's complicated and it's multifaceted thing. And I'm not saying zines are a solution, but they are an approach that I think has kind of unique value.
Yeah.
Within that, my work with zines and the zine library has been massively impacted by COVID-19. Obviously, the physical library is closed, all the workshops that I do are postponed, and I think I, along with basically everyone else, are working to try and find new ways to do things. So at the moment, kind of on the days of the week where I'm not figuring out how to engage staff and students with cycling from one side of a computer, I'm trying to figure out how to build and sustain and maintain the community that zines, and specifically mental health zines, create without the actual physical acts of sending and receiving or attending events or meetings at the library.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so have you found that there's been a lot of interest in maintaining that community digitally? There have been lots of other people.
It's been great actually seeing the kind of diversity of different approaches and events that have been popping up. People running zine clubs, or conveniently quarantine rhymes with zine. So there's just been a lot of like quarantines like spreading up everywhere, lots of collaborative stuff. People kind of, really, I think, working hard to maintain that community, despite the kind of the challenges and the physical barriers.
Yeah. What kind of events have you been putting on?
So I've been experimenting with lots of different platforms. So about 2 weeks ago, as the Edinburgh Zine library, we ran a zine in a day. And what we did for that was originally going to be a physical event at the Central Library, but we decided to reimagine it as a kind of like a cross-platform event and think about the ways that one of the functions that zines have is to kind of archive and record. And so we wanted to think about how we could use zines to record that day. So we chose a theme, which was window, and then we invited like formal submissions. So that would be like A5 pages. But we also invited people to post on Instagram with that hashtag, and we just screenshot their post, to post on Twitter with that hashtag, and we just screenshot their post as a way of, engaging without formally making a zine page. And we also, one of our members created these amazing templates for our Instagram stories that people could screenshot and then draw on and then repost with us tagged in. So we kind of tried that. We've also done more sort of kind of closer to workshopy events. So we've done kind of some Instagram live making. I've recorded a YouTube workshop. Last night I ran a Zoom-based zine workshop as part of the Young Friends of the Earth Scotland online Skillshare. I think like we've been trying, and lots of other, so like the Welcome library down in London has a zine collection, and they've been running a monthly zine club on Instagram Live. I think lots of people are trying out lots of different platforms at the moment and just seeing what works, what sticks, what's more or less accessible, and what people like to engage with. And also, frankly, all of us have really varying levels of energy at the moment. So finding ways for people to participate on low energy days as well as on kind of like high energy days. I know like I've certainly felt lots of barriers to kind of being creative and engaging with stuff. So thinking about a kind of a diversity of ways for people to participate.
Yeah, it's really it's a complicated time for stuff like that, I think. you touched on it a little bit already, but how do you think we can prepare for the long-term impact that COVID-19 might have in the future? And what sorts of things do you think, how do you think zines will fit in with that?
So I think it's a really interesting question. And kind of my grounding point for thinking about this has actually been, I'll see if I can find it, a tweet that a friend of mine who also organises Birmingham Zine Fest, so it's kind of part of the zine community, she tweeted it a couple of weeks ago. Her name's Louise Bing, and she tweeted, take a deep breath. I realised today that panic takes a lot of different forms. Take another breath. Does the content you're making and sharing make sense for your organisation in the long run? Take another breath. Or are you blinded by all that is in front of you right now? Slow down. What mode were you in before COVID? Slow down. What are you really good at and well placed to do? Slow down. How do you want your work to go forward in the future? Slow down. Who do you need to focus on and stay connected with in order to keep building? Slow down. And I think I've just had that in mind as I've been approaching, kind of thinking about the changes that we've been making at the Zine Library and how we interact with people and how to make that sustainable, because I think right now we're laying the foundation for the future, and I think it would be a mistake to assume that things can or will just go back to normal and to previous modes and ways of working. So I think I've just spent a lot of time considering what is it that zines do, what are zines good at, and how do we translate the values that I kind of discussed before that zines have into kind of digital zine making and kind of more digital engagement. I think testing out different ways of engaging and creating content is a really important part of learning. And kind of in the events and stuff that we've run that I kind of discussed, that's a lot of what we're doing. There aren't precedents necessarily for this situation. There are some great examples of stuff that people have done in the past, and I think we can look to communities who have experienced isolation or issues with access in order to look for examples. Like Drawn Poorly is an amazing zine that collects stories and experiences around kind of chronic illness and mental health, and we kind of drew from there. Last year they had their first birthday party, but instead of turning it into a big event, or like instead of turning it into a big physical event, they had this little pack which had like a sticker that said "Too poorly to party" and some little zine making prompts, and you could sign up and they'd send out this little pack, and then everyone on the same day posted to social media, you know, wearing their sticker and sharing some aspect of their experience or having a go creating. And this was way before any of this kind of like physical distance and stuff. This was kind of last year. But I think looking to those communities and the stuff that they're already doing is a great way to learn and skill up. And I think from my perspective, that's what this time is for. Now is a time to skill up, and also now is a time to share our learning. I think, like, you know, I ran the zine workshop last night as part of the Skillshare that Young Friends of the Earth, the online Skillshare Young Friends of the Earth were running. And I think that's the thing about zines, is that they're a great vehicle for sharing learning and knowledge. And one of their kind of fundamental values is rejecting ideas of expertise, or that a single voice should be a dominant one. I think, you know, from my perspective, I don't know what the zine library is going to look like in the future, or like what our events are going to look like. But right now, all I'm interested in is opening up possibilities and giving us choice, and also really understanding platforms and learning new platforms and pooling that knowledge and borrowing from each other and sharing that. You know, now is the time to figure out how to run a Zoom call and the positives and negatives of it, and how to secure it and how to safeguard participants inside it, and sharing that learning amongst organizations and between organizations, between institutions, and between members in the form of a zine. Really kind of democratizes, I try not to say that word. But, you know, also I think, like, thinking about it in kind of like an educational context, like, it's not just staff who are going to be wanting to run digital events, like students will want to too. So kind of having that knowledge exchange. And I think also kind of like referencing back to kind of the Drawn Poorly event and stuff, there's a lot of knowledge already embedded in institutions, in communities. And zines are a great way to draw out that knowledge. And we've definitely found that it's a great way to kind of draw out knowledge that's within the zine library about different platforms, about different ways of engaging. And I think it's also really important to do that because I don't know if you've come across the concept of Zoom bombing.
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, so it was really big a couple of weeks ago, before everyone had kind of figured out how to secure Zoom calls. Generally, if you had a public meeting, some kind of like terrible person would post it on a forum, the link, and then people would pile on and just kind of like hurl abuse and shut the meeting down. And it was kind of driven by like boredom and people being awful and a desire to cause chaos.
Yeah.
But like sharing the knowledge amongst groups on how to secure Zoom calls, because Zoom has a bunch of features that they've built in now to make it more secure and to reduce the risk of that happening, is really important. I think just like in the very early days of the internet, when everything was like new and scary and everyone had a lot of fear about like how the internet would be used, the best defense is learning how to use technology, like mastering Instagram stories, figuring out Twitch. And the best way to do that is sharing the kind of knowledge. Yeah. And I think also like we're thinking about zines now as like, how will they be used in the future to share self-care skills, to share coping skills, and to process what is a period of uncertainty and trauma and loss and facing newness and change. And there's a great paper written actually by Jackie Beatty, who is at the University of Portsmouth, and they have a great zine collection in their library. And she's written about the narratives of mental health in their zine collection, particularly in like art zines, and how this can be used to support students, because zines can visually communicate in a way that just a leaflet or a text kind of blog post can't. Yeah. And also I think the process of making a zine itself is a reflective process, which in itself can contribute to better mental health, can allow you to process what are a series of very complicated feelings. So yeah, I think we kind of been thinking about it along two strands really. Like firstly, like what is our organization going to look like in a year's time, like, and how can we skill up now to give us the option to be a whole bunch of different things, and really reflect and make intentional choices rather than panicked ones about a desire to produce stuff now. And secondly, how can we facilitate zines as a way to process and share and discuss this period, and record it as well, in a way that's kind of meaningful.
Yeah, it seems like zines are a really good kind of platform for reaching and engaging people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have. It's really interesting. Fascinating. Thank you. So a lot of students and people may not have previously felt kind of anxiety or anything like that, but because of the situation might be currently feeling those. So how do you think we can support students who might not have had contact with support services previously? How can we support them now?
So I think kind of going back to the values of zines that I talked about before, this idea of like complexity and multiplicity, I think in some ways people might not identify what's happening to them now or the way that they're feeling now as related to mental health, because actually how a lot of us are feeling is like a proportionate response to like the massive global crisis. So it can be hard to then connect that to maybe wanting to access support. And I think one of the ways that zines are really good is that you rarely have a zine about a singular topic. They're a space that opens up to all bunch of things, and it doesn't demand you to just talk about one thing. So you might make a zine that's all about, like I've got a zine that's all about like Bob Ross, for example, and a love of Bob Ross.
Yeah.
But actually, kind of like woven in that could be discussions of mental health or anxiety, or like this one's quite like a compelling critique of kind of like art school culture.
Oh, wow.
But essentially they don't demand like a singular narrative or a singular thing to talk about, and I think that can be a really interesting way to start having conversations kind of about mental health without making it about mental health, essentially, which can be something that people don't feel connected to as an idea. I know certainly that like I've used zines to connect with people about things like about cycling, about climate change. It's a really kind of like creative and hands-on way to get people talking and thinking about things in a way that they might not have before. I think also like zines, I think I've been thinking a lot recently about the work that zines kind of do to build community and to make people feel connected within that community, and specifically kind of like an embodied community, which is something that zine academics have written about a lot. I've got like a book that's it's a really interesting book actually. It's by Alison Piepmeyer, and it's kind of like it's a bunch of quite texty essays about zines. But one of the things that she talks about, and one of the things that's picked up a lot when talking about zines, is this idea of embodied community. And embodied is like a community that you can physically feel in the room, kind of with you, even when you're not in the room. And I think it's kind of opposite. It's like an imagined community, which is a community of people you experience only in your head. And I think like making people feel that kind of like physical link and that physical connection to community, and considering kind of a community's well-being as well as individual well-being, is a good way to reach people who might not have previously considered kind of mental health as an important part of their lives, or things they wanted to access support. I think this idea kind of community care and community support is a really important part of zines and zine making. And I think now's this question as well of like, which kind of links back to what I was saying before, of how to replicate this kind of like substantive and tangible community when we're all quite physically distant from each other.
Yeah. That's great, thank you. Fab. Thank you very much. Are there any events coming up that you want to talk about?
So at the moment, the Zine Library, we're just putting together the kind of the collaborative zine that we all made, and we're gonna take some time to reflect on that process and whether we enjoyed it, because I think like enjoying the stuff you're doing is an important part of like continuing to do it.
Moment as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to be reflecting on that. So you can obviously like see the result of that will be on the Zine Library website. Otherwise, we're just continuing to produce content on kind of like our social media. We don't have any like scheduled events, but if you do want to kind of take part or have a go at zine making or a zine workshop, there's a monthly zine club run by The Welcome on the first Wednesday of every month on Instagram Live. And also if you head to the website of the work that me and my wife do, which is Gears for Queers, we've got a YouTube video up at the moment of a 30-minute long zine workshop. It's specifically geared towards cycling, but the activity can be done by anyone, and it'll take you through folding a mini zine and having a go making your first zine. So.
Oh, great. I'm definitely going to get into it a bit more. Sounds, it's really interesting.
I'll also probably put some notes maybe from this chat on my blog, and I can also include just like a list of resources and places to have a look at if you're interested in seeing more zines. The Edinburgh Zine Library catalogue is online, so you can have a look at some of the zines that we have or that you can't flick inside them. But the Queer Zine Library, which is the travelling library of zines, they have an online catalogue too, and they have a searchable function so you can find digital zines through them. So that's a good way, if you can't physically get hold of a zine, to have a go reading through and getting a sense of how they feel.
Great, thank you very much. That's fab.
No worries.